My name is Rohini Rathour, and I help individuals who really want to explore what's possible for them. And they come to me with an open mind and they're ambitious about making things better for themselves, whether it's then in their personal life or their professional life, or it could even be because they want to become better leaders. And increasingly, because they want money to flow and grow more freely in their lives. I spent 2 decades in wealth management before I took early retirement 10 years ago. So that world of investing and, managing money was a really familiar one to me. However, what I do now is very different. So I don't offer financial advice. I don't get remunerated for any, products that you may choose to go after in terms of your money management. I'm simply here as a coach, in my capacity as a coach, to guide and mentor people to take what's the right step for them. So, what I'd like to begin with is really, I suppose, explore the whole emotion of anxiety. And I want us to think about anxiety as this kind of, I don't know if you've ever had a sort of very overprotective or anxious parent who like is constantly trying to save you from yourself, So it's that voice that says, "Oh my God, don't do that," because what if, what if? So I think if we kind of look at anxiety as an emotion, the role of which is to prepare us for an uncertain world, it's also an emotion that helps to prevent you making some horrible mistakes. So it might be that voice that tells you, wait, do you remember that last time you did that and that was a terrible mistake? So maybe you don't want to do that again. So, that protection, the prevention, and preparation, those are three key things that the emotion of anxiety is really helping you to do. And financial anxiety is one aspect of that. And in that comes in, our personal relationship with money. When we look at financial anxiety, and there's some studies that show that in the UK, 1 in 3 people claim to be financially anxious. And to me, that number probably understates the real scale of financial anxiety. And the reason I say this is, imagine somebody who on the outside looks quite wealthy. Maybe they have a nice house, they've got a job that pays them very well, they've got a sort of a fairly fancy job title, and yet they're financially anxious because they probably have a lot of debt. The house they own, is mortgaged up to the hilt, so they don't actually own it. Perhaps they had a double income and now their partner is no longer working. So there are so many things that, looking at their life, especially if you look at, social media, if you look at somebody's Facebook or Instagram posts, that we are never going to know. And that person is unlikely to want to admit to being anxious about money. Why? Because there could be judgment, there could be shame, there could be guilt around how they managed to get themselves into a position where they're now financially anxious. So the point I'm trying to make is that the actual scale of financial anxiety is probably way higher than any studies or research results will tell us they are. And we need to be compassionate both with ourselves and with other people, and not judge them based on what they're showing us about the outside of their life. So, if I was to remind you about the three key things that make us able to create the life we want, one of them is obviously money. And money is the currency with which we can, create a certain lifestyle, or we can buy the things that make us safe, comfortable, happy, etc. But the other two that are not directly linked to money, one is time, and this is your time on this earth. Secondly, it's your energy. And when I say energy, I'm talking about your life force, your health. And those two things are much more in your control in terms of how you spend your time, how you are in terms of what energy you're putting out there, how your health is, etc. However, if you start to have anxieties around those things, like suddenly you start to to worry about your health, or you worry about, the job that you don't enjoy anymore, then they have an indirect or even direct link with money, because it suddenly means that something is changing inside you or around you that could trigger things that you no longer control. And therefore, that could impact what it means for you in terms of money. All right. So, what we're trying to do is, first of all, before we can replace anxiety with greater awareness, we are learning how to recognize it. And we're learning how to be compassionate with ourselves, as in not trying to immediately push it away. Because, we established at the start of this session that anxiety is like an anxious, overprotective, well-meaning parent, or even some other figure in your life who kind of looks out for you, who's trying to keep you safe. And if you think that, okay, something inside me is playing that role, the fears I'm experiencing are there to protect me, to stop me from doing something stupid, and to really prepare me for an uncertain world. Then suddenly you can actually think, okay, well, I see you for what you are. I witness this anxiety, but maybe the anxiety would be less extreme if I became more aware of why it's cropping up and what I need to do instead. Okay, so let's look at the flow of money. So in the middle here is where the money's coming in for you from. It could be from a job, or if you have savings that is generating an income for you, it could be some kind of passive income. It could be, if you're retired, it could be your pension. So there are many, many different ways in which this money could be flowing into your life. And then, of course, you've got the usual things that money goes out. You're paying your bills, because obviously you've got things that you have to spend on to make your life comfortable. Perhaps you're saving some money. If you're still in work and you've still got, some spare money each month, you're putting money aside. Here, this icon here is about protection. Especially if you have a family, you have dependents, some of your money may be going towards creating that safety net, both for yourself, but also for your family. Then here, this little granny here is all about retirement, what you're going to have to fall back on once you're not working anymore and you don't have your usual source of income. Then here we've got, the money that's going towards investments, which are quite a separate category to saving, because savings are really there when you can't risk losing any money. So, you put into a savings account and it hopefully pays you some interest, which compensates you for inflation. Whereas investment is for more 5 years plus, where you can allow your money to grow. You're putting into something that is going to generate inflation plus returns. And then finally here, this icon represents debt. It could be debt in the form of personal loans. Say, if you want to buy a big ticket item, like say buy a car, or go on a very expensive holiday, maybe you put it on your credit card and then you pay it off over a period of time. Or it could be a really big, longer term debt, like, a mortgage or a housing finance, to buy yourself somewhere to live. So these are the key sort of areas where money flows. And this is an important starting point for us to think about the sources of anxiety, and in particular when we're talking about anxiety around money. Poverty is relative, so you can have somebody who has a house, who's got a TV, who's got children at a nice school, and then you've got somebody who's scraping, month after month, doesn't have some of the conveniences that we take for granted. So poverty is relative. However, the anxiety that comes with whatever your life circumstances is very real. And it doesn't matter whether you've got a lot of money or you've got no money. In fact, when you have a lot of money, there's more reasons to be anxious, because then you're going to worry about losing all that money, the social status that you lose if you lose your house or you lose your job. Whereas somebody who has very little, is already living with much less, and therefore perhaps they're fear of loss is consequently less. First of all, we're going to take any judgment out of how we're feeling anxious or how someone else is feeling anxious about their money, because really there's no hierarchy for pain. And then I'd like you to think about your own specific circumstances. And if you are experiencing anxiety, to think about it in three clear, separate buckets. So let's go through those one by one. So it could be that your current circumstances are leading you to think about, well, where's my income going to come from if I lose my job? And consequently, well, how am I going to afford to pay for all these things that I've been paying? You know, this mortgage, these other expenses, the things that my family's got used to, and now I can't possibly go and say to them, well, we can't have that. Or it could just be that the inflow bit is all fine. There's nothing to worry about. However, suddenly your outflows are going up. The mortgage interest rate that had been low for a really long time is now suddenly been reset and is much higher. It could be any number of things. Okay. So for you to be able to pinpoint the source of your anxiety is very helpful. Your net worth is generally your balance sheet. What if you own a property, how much of it do you genuinely own? That will tell you what your net worth is in terms of your property. And then if you've got other things, like if you've got, um, say savings, or you've got investments, you add it all up as your assets, and then you take away from that things that you owe others, and what's left is your net worth. Okay. So again, that is something that can either be a source of comfort or it can be a source of anxiety, depending on what your situation is. But really, once you actually break it all down, it can be so helpful, because, things that were so obscure in your mind suddenly become clearer. The second piece, or the second source of anxiety, can be future prospects. Now, it's not a surprise that when studies have shown that a third of the UK population is anxious about money, the actual percentage for younger people is more like 50 or 60%, or maybe even higher. That is not surprising. For a young person whose life is just beginning, everything's this massive, great unknown. And a lot of it is going to rely on how much money they have. Am I going to be able to own my own home? Am I going to actually have enough money to have the wedding I want? What if I have kids? Oh my God. So there's all this stuff that can be extremely overwhelming, hence the anxiety. Safety net. We talked about, what if something goes wrong and suddenly you need to have a safety net. Healthcare, retirement. So these are all future things, and you might just worry about them, or you could think, well, okay, what can I do to take that anxiety away, so I at least know I've done something about it? Okay. And the third thing is your money story, the values around money. A lot of people grow up with certain myths and prejudices around money. Some people might think, well, wanting money makes me greedy, or people with a lot of money are probably not nice people. There's all this stuff around money, and it can really mess our relationship with money. So I think becoming aware, how am I relating to my money? What are the things that I've actually learned from other people that are maybe not borne out through my own experiences, is really helpful. And the last one here, which is a very intriguing piece of your money story, is the emotions you inherit from your parents that you may not even be aware of. It could be from your parents, it could be from your grandparents, it can be from somewhere down the lineage that you belong to, where someone has had a relationship with money that was extremely difficult, that caused them a lot of anxiety, a lot of anguish, and you, without even realizing it, have carried it in your DNA along with everything else that the DNA carries. And you are now experiencing bouts of anxiety that you can't really explain through your own lived in experience. So I think being aware that, hey, this is not even my emotion, and I need to find a way to come to terms with it. in this uncertain world, especially because we have so much real time news and information, whether it's real or fake, who knows? There's so much bombardment from outside that it becomes more important than ever to determine what is in your control, what is within your sphere of influence. And the reason this is important is because imagine this anxious voice inside you that is trying to prepare you for the vast, unfathomable unknown, where there's all kinds of curveballs and unforeseeable things and stuff that's happening that you could not have predicted. And I think in that, it can feel like your sphere of influence is becoming smaller and smaller. But however small it feels, I would invite you to become more cognizant of what's in there, because that's going to be key to you keeping your sanity and not going completely bonkers from all the stuff that's happening in the world that you have zero control over. Okay, so now we're finally getting to the really meaty bit of what you need to do to replace your anxiety with awareness. So, step one is I'm going to invite you to make a list of fears and worries. They don't have to be just about money, they can be anything at all. Step two is to look closely at each of those things you've written down and label it IMC, which means in my control. If you think whatever that thing is you're afraid of is something you can do something about. Step three is anything that did not have the label IMC next to it, just cross it out because it's not relevant to your list, because there's nothing you can do about it. And what is the point spending a lot of your energy being anxious? So you will now be left with a list, I hope, is a little bit shorter and a bit more manageable. So the next step is that look at those items on your list. And if you think that that thing is important to you, and when I say you, I don't mean just you personally, because it could be that it's important to your family, it's important to, your colleagues, includes the people you care about, the people who rely on you, the people whose, well-being matters to you. So if that thing is important to that sphere of influence, then mark it with an IMP. If not, leave it blank. So then the next one is to label urgent against that same list where you've marked important for the things that are important. Urgent, that is, let's say you have a bill to pay. This is a final demand, and if you don't pay by a certain day, then dire consequences. And also then become mindful of how much time you have. Okay, so that was the 5 steps. And then look at this list now, which hopefully is a little bit shorter. And you've got the labels important, urgent. Some of the items will be important and urgent, in which case they kind of go up, if you're going to rank them in order of sort of priority and things that you actually want to focus your attention on to replace them with some greater awareness and an action plan, then those will go on the top of your list because you want to deal with them first. And so you can then rank it in any order that feels right for you. So we've done these 6 steps, and at the end of it, it is my hope that you have a list that is a little bit more manageable. It is really prioritized based on what you need and want and what is a good focused use of your time and energy. And then you go to the 7th step and you look at these items and you assess what you need to do and what plan you need to create so that you can then replace that source of anxiety with either greater awareness in terms of like, this is what I need to do, and an action plan that means that you then no longer have to be anxious about it. This final bit is just me sort of giving you a little taste of where I could potentially help you. So I work in these different capacities to help my clients to make the most of their time, energy, and money so they can create their own blueprint of an abundant life. These are some of the different modalities with which I help them. You can find out more about it on my website. And ultimately, each client is different. Each person's wishes and goals are going to be unique to them. So often it's a combination of some of these things rather than just purely one or the other. If you were thinking about personal finance coaching in particular, these are some of the elements that would be covered in that. Understanding your money story is going to be a key part of that. Then you getting really clear on what it is you want in terms of your financial goals, what you need to do to lay a strong financial foundation, and then to create a plan to build on top of that foundation so you can actually create your abundant life. If you found what we've talked about has been interesting, helpful, useful, you're welcome to go on my website and have a little look. There's some quite fun stuff in there, and we've recently updated it. So there's blogs and some useful resources in there. And if after all of that you think, well, I could really do some help actually making a plan, because sometimes even making that plan can be tricky, it can be overwhelming. So having somebody there as your objective guide, who's not in any way emotionally connected with you, who can create a safe space for you to do that, can be really helpful, and I can provide that space for you.